going to start out this morning in Luke chapter 18. Luke chapter 18. I'm going to go ahead and read, beginning in verse 31, Luke chapter 18, verse 31, down through 19, verse 10. It says, Then he took unto him the 12, and said unto them, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and all things that were written by the prophets concerning the Son of Man shall be accomplished. For he shall be delivered unto the Gentiles, and shall be mocked, and spitefully entreated, and spitted upon. And they shall scourge him, and put him to death. And the third day he shall rise again. And they understood none of these things, and this saying was hid from them, neither knew they the things which were spoken. And it came to pass that it was, as he was come nigh unto Jericho, a certain blind man sat by the wayside begging. And hearing the multitude pass by, he asked what it meant. And they told him that Jesus of Nazareth passeth by. And he cried, saying, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And they which went before rebuked him that he should hold his peace. But he cried so much the more, Thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he was come near, he asked him, saying, What wilt thou that I shall do unto thee? And he said, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said unto him, Receive thy sight, thy faith has saved thee. And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise unto God. And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him, and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste and come down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fullfold. And Jesus said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, for as much as he also is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which is lost. Now I thought I might start out today as sort of a review of where we've been. We started last week looking full into the cross, had a full view, and we read that there. Jesus was in Perea on the other side of Jordan with his disciples, because after he raised Lazarus, they were trying to kill him. They were trying to figure out how they could get rid of him. So he went across the Jordan there and was in Perea with his disciples. And we see here is they were all these people gathered, and all these people heading toward Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. Jesus and the disciples had sort of gathered in a group there and were traveling along with them. And it says here that he pulled his disciples aside and he told them where they were heading. We're going to Jerusalem, and I can only imagine, because they knew the things that were out there. They knew that they wanted to kill Jesus. They knew that they'd probably be in trouble too, and all these other things if they went to Jerusalem. But he told them, he said, we're heading toward Jerusalem. This is what's going to happen. These are the things that are going to be accomplished. They're going to take me. They're going to spitefully use me there. They're going to crucify me. And all the things that the prophets wrote about me are going to come true, is what he told them. So they left Perea. They crossed the Jordan River. they were on their way to Jericho, and that's where they ran into blind Bartimaeus, the blind man. They were on their way to Jericho, looking full view into that cross. And he had time for this blind man. Had time for this man that had, we don't really know how long he'd been sitting there along the edge of the road begging, but he knew something important was coming by, and Jesus had time for him. And it says that he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. He had some insight that the disciples didn't. If you'll notice there in verse 34, it said, and they understood none of these things. The disciples didn't understand what was going on. But Bartimaeus knew that he was the King of Kings because of how he cried out, "Thou Son of David, have mercy on me." He knew there was something there. He had spiritual insight. Even though these 12 had been with him, they were sort of blind. It kind of is a twist there, I guess you could say. They were sort of blind, and yet blind Bartimaeus saw completely what was going on. But he went on through as he left there, blind Bartimaeus in tow, I believe. He went on into Jericho, it tells us there in chapter 19. And as he got into Jericho, there was a man named Zacchaeus. So he's left Perea, he's crossed Jordan, he's headed toward Jericho. He meets blind Bartimaeus and makes him whole, gives him his sight, makes him whole because of his faith. And now he finds Zacchaeus here in the tree. And as he talks with Zacchaeus here, he comes and asks Zacchaeus, or tells Zacchaeus he's got to spend some time with him and all those different things. And he reveals his purpose here, what he was here for. In verse 10 he says, "For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost." You know, as he's on his way here looking full into the cross, his concern was those around him. You know, how often do we lose all concern for those around us and only look inwardly? Only look at self, or only concerned about our situation and our circumstance in life, the things that are going on with us. How often does that happen? And yet, he knew all the things that were coming about, and you know, things that really we cannot imagine. I can try to explain it, but unless we actually saw it, we wouldn't understand. We couldn't fathom what all went on. And yet, he knew all these things that was going to come about, and yet he was looking at all those around him. All those around him. That's amazing, isn't it? Our God, how amazing he is. As he revealed his purpose, he was there to seek and to save us, is what he was there for. If you flip over into John chapter 12, Jesus and his disciples had made their way, and looking at the timeline, from what I've seen, it looked like he probably arrived about Thursday of this week there in Bethany. And when you think about Bethany, there's three important times that we notice when Jesus was at Bethany. In Luke chapter 10, and I'll read John 12 in just a minute, but in Luke chapter 10, it says, "Now it came to pass as they went, that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about with serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered and said to Martha, and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things. But one thing is needful, and Mary had chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her." So we see there that Jesus was traveling through, and he was received by Martha. They took him into their house. And we see a relationship develop there because of these things. We know there was a relationship, there was a closeness, because we see in John chapter 11, it says, "Now a certain man was sick named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment, and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. And when Jesus heard that, he said, The sickness is not the death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus." So we see there had been a special relationship come between these. This was a special place for Jesus as he came there. A special place and a special time as he came into this place. In John chapter 12 there, it says, "Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then said one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the bag, and bare what was put therein. Then said Jesus, Let her alone, against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always." So as we see this, as we look at this, we see that this was a special place. A special place for Jesus. And he came to this special place on his way to Jerusalem. So why was it important, or why was it special? Well, I've already told you he had a special relationship with the poor that he was having supper with here that night. It says that he was in Simon the leper's house with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Those were the four that were giving him this supper. And we know that there's a special relationship there because they loved each other. But when you think about the importance of Bethany and some of the things that were there, I think it's good for us to understand some of these things. Bethany was set up, and when you think about it, it was a house of brokenness. It was a place where the sick and the lepers were cast out to. There was a declaration made at that time that anybody that was sick or a leper had to be about 1.5 miles away from the temple. And Bethany was the perfect spot. It was about 1.7 miles or 2 miles is what they say from Jerusalem there. Another part of that was they had to be that far away, but the other part of that was they had to be unseen by the temple, which means the temple couldn't be in view from wherever they were at. So as we think about this important place, Jesus came in there in a house of brokenness. You can think about maybe his mindset, the things going through his mind, the tasks that were before him and things of that nature. And as he got to this place, that place that had been in full view was sort of shattered. He couldn't see Jerusalem. He knew he was going to Jerusalem, but he wasn't able to physically see it at that point. And I think that may have had some significance. When we're having troubles and trials in our lives, a lot of times what do? We want to take our mind off of it for just a minute, don't we? We want to sort of get away from it for just a minute. And that may have been one of the opportunities for Jesus to do that. Just to be able to come into this place, sit down, rest and relax. We also have to think about family. You know, a lot of times, where are we the most comfortable? Where are we the most relaxed? With Mary and Martha and Lazarus, I believe Jesus thought of them just like family. And when he was there, he was completely and totally relaxed. He was able to kind of say, for just a minute before he continued on. It was a special place to him. We see that because we see with Mary a lot of times we find a place of faith as we find Mary sitting at his feet, fully enveloped into what Jesus was teaching and fully enveloped into the things of Christ there. As we read in that first passage from Luke chapter 10, the sister was even a little upset because Mary was sitting there at her feet getting all she could from Jesus. And here she was going back and forth trying to make sure everything was done and everything was completed. So we see that this is a place of faith. These folks believed in Jesus. They believed in who he was. They believed in what he could do. We see that from her sitting at his feet. We also see that from the example there in John chapter 11 as he came and he raised Lazarus from the dead. When they came out to him, they said, if you had only been here, our brother wouldn't be dead. And they were correct. He could have been there on time and saved them, but there was a different point to be made here. They were correct. They had great faith in him. They had great faith. And then as he called out, and he says, Lazarus comes forth, and they saw him come out of the grave, come out of the place where they'd laid him. I can only imagine the increase in faith that was in their lives there as they saw these things come about. So we see that this is a place of great faith. We see that this was a place where Christ was welcome. When we get here, it says they made him a supper. He was welcome. Everything that was going on was about Jesus. He was the honored guest. His preferences, his needs, everything that was required for him, that was put first. He was in his rightful place, the object of affection and devotion as he came into that place. Everything was about him. Again, I have to ask, how often is it about us instead of him? How often are we looking inwardly instead of full in his face, full toward him? He was the honored guest. And everything there was his preference. I kind of feel like that Martha probably knew exactly what meal he liked. And I believe that's the meal that was laid on the table that night. I believe that everything was done in accordance with the things that he needed. And as I said, like going into family's home, he was able just to recline there at the table and for a moment in time be able to breathe a sigh of relief. These people are not going to harm me. These people are not going to cast me out and get me stoned. These people are not going to go get the Sadducees and the Pharisees and bring them down here so I'll be arrested. These people are going to protect me. These people are going to watch over me. These people care for me at this moment in time. So we see that this was a place of love. Place of love. He loved them, and I believe they loved him supremely from the way that they did things here, from the things that went on. A place of complete and total worship. I wondered as I thought about these things and as I studied, and is that where I'm at? Am I at a place where I love him supremely? Am I at a place where I can completely and totally worship him? Why do you say that it was a complete and total worship? Well, if you look at this in verse 3, it says, Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Mary here had been spending her time at Jesus' feet. She had been seeing and hearing all that he had been teaching. She knew all these things. And it says that she took this pound of ointment, spikenard, very costly. The Bible tells, or the commentators tell us, one of the men here says, why didn't we take this and sell it for 300, I think they said pence, but it says it was worth 320 some denarii, and a denarii was a day's wage. So it was almost a year's wage is what she poured out on his. In other Gospels it says head, so she poured it out on his head and feet and anointed him. Nearly a year's wage. You know, what am I willing to give? What am I willing to give to my Savior, to my King, to my friend? This was a place of complete and total worship. We know that because she spit this costly spikenard. But we also see that because it says that she anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. Foot washing was reserved for slaves. That's who did the foot washing at this time. It was reserved for them. Nobody else done it. And we see Mary willingly not only wash his feet with this ointment, but she wiped his feet with her hair. We see a huge act of humility here. Most people don't even want to get down at somebody's feet. And we see Mary willing to give all that she had, a year's wage, and then use her hair to wash his feet. A place of complete and total worship. Do we find ourselves in that place of complete and total worship? I believe also that this was a place of refuge and rest. You know, it says here that he had been able to recline and sit there at the table. It was a refuge for him, a time of rest, as these things come about. I thought about us and how we can run to him, and what do we find? We find refuge and rest. In any of those times that we find ourselves in a position where it's uncomfortable for us in this world. When we're sick, when we're afflicted, when we have troubles and trials, when there's tribulations in our life, where do we run? We run to that place of refuge and rest. Boy, we need that, don't we? So did he at this point in time. So did he. You know, I told you a minute ago that the temple couldn't be seen from this place. But the Garden of Gethsemane could. And that's where the place of prayer took place, as Jesus, the night before he was taken, the night of he was taken. So we have to wonder if maybe Bethany was a place of prayer warriors also. Place where they prayed for him. Place where they uplifted their requests to God for their king that was walking on this earth. When all the trials and tribulations were going on a few days ahead, were they looking down on the Garden of Gethsemane in full prayer for what was going on there? I believe it was a place of prayer. Bethany was important. It was important to him, important to us. But we, like the disciples, a lot of times we miss it, don't we? In verse 4 it says, Then saith one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the bag, and bare what was put therein. So we see that they missed it again. They had opportunity, and last week, as we began to look at this, he said these are the things that are going to happen, and they completely missed it. They put it off. Hey, we're going to Jerusalem. We're setting up our earthly kingdom. I'm going to be one of the greatest in that kingdom. I really don't know why Mary anointed him. Now, she may have heard Jesus teaching and he said that he had to die. There was some sort of spiritual insight here, I believe, just like there was with blind Bartimaeus. There was a spiritual insight. And I believe with Mary there was a spiritual insight. She knew that this was going to happen. And we talked a little bit about the things that happened during crucifixion. And I learned something else as I was reading this, that somebody that was crucified was not allowed to have the spices put upon them after they passed. They anointed the bodies before they put them into the tomb. And because they had been crucified, that wasn't allowed. Remember, I told you what happened to those that was crucified. They just let them fall into a hump there for the dogs and whatever to eat. They're just right off from the foot of the cross. They weren't allowed to be moved. They weren't allowed to be buried. They weren't allowed to have these things. There's spiritual insight there. And all these begin. Judas here begins. He said, why wasn't this sold for 300 pence? Why didn't we sell that and give it to the poor? He didn't care about the poor. The Bible tells us that he had the bag. And in that bag, he could get a little off the top for Judas. If there wasn't 300 pence in that bag and there was an anointment on God's head and feet, he couldn't sell that. He couldn't use it. So again, it's all about him. How often is it all about us? They missed it. They fussed and complained. There was a spiritual insensitivity here with the disciples. They didn't understand what these things were for. They didn't understand. Their mindset was, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? How often do we have that same sort of mindset whenever we come to God? We come to Him and we say, Lord, I'm in this place. I gotta have. What's in it for me? How often do we come to Him and we do like Mary did here and get down between His feet, tears running down her face? Now, I don't know that was happening, but I kind of believe it was. Tears running down her face and saying, God, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? How often do we do that? Instead of what's in it for me. We need to be saying, God, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? You see, Mary here had poured it all out for Him. She'd poured everything out for Him. Everything. Have we done that in our lives? Have we poured it all out for Him? Are we willing to give all? Are we willing to sacrifice all? Are we willing to love with all that we have for Him? Because He's traveling on with that in full view for you. Are you willing to give all for Him? If you would stand with me this morning.
Page 602. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have
decided to follow Him completely and totally.
To follow Jesus.
We decided to give Him our all.
I have decided to
follow. We decided to go
Jesus.
Wherever, no matter what.
No turning back.
No matter what.
No no turning back.
I certainly hope we have this morning. It's important for us to do those things. To follow Him, no matter what. I'm thankful that when I cried out, the Lord knew exactly where I was. And that He gave me the opportunity to follow Him. You know, He's taken me places I didn't think I would be and had no intention to be and really didn't want to be at some point in time. But He knew exactly where I should be. I'm thankful for what He does. Anybody got a testimony or anything you'd like to say this morning?